I want to talk to you about Cry Baby. This is a John Waters film released in 1990, starring Johnny Depp. You see pretty prominently featured on the cover there. And this was recently released in a really beautiful 4K Blu-ray combo edition with two different cuts of the film in this disc and a whole bunch of special features. I received this as a review copy and was very happy to do so. Now let me just talk a little bit about John Waters, okay? I have a lot of respect for the guy. I always find him nothing less than fascinating and hilarious and insightful. Every time I hear him talk, you give a commentary track, listen to an audio book, read an article, or an interview with him, whatever the case may be. But I'll just have to say that I don't naturally gravitate to his style of movies. I don't just pop them on for fun, even though they are fun when I do pop them in. But, you know, when I think of a John Waters movie, my mind automatically goes back to that early stuff that he did. Multiple Maniacs, Pink Flamingos, Female Trouble, Desperate Living, one that hasn't been released by Criterion, but I kind of wonder if maybe someday that's down the road. And of course, Polyester kind of marked where he started transitioning into more commercial territory. And Cry Baby is the follow-up to, I think, what was his biggest commercial hit, which was Hairspray from 1987. And this is arguably John Waters' magnum opus as far as production values, budget, studio support, the cast. I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But I was not really familiar with any of those details until I got this disc. I picked it up, selected it from the options presented to me just because, hey, it's John Waters. I was very pleased that they sent the 4K edition. They don't always do that with review copies, so thank you, Kino Lorber, for making this one available. I give it a very enthusiastic recommendation to cut to the chase, but let me say more about it. Okay, so here in this film, we basically have Johnny Depp making his feature film debut as far as a leading role is concerned. He'd had a few other kind of bit parts in earlier films, but this is the first one where he's up front and center. This was right around the time that he was breaking out as a big-time star in 21 Jump Street, and this was his effort and the studio's effort, his agent's effort, if you will, the whole machine behind him to make Johnny Depp something different than just a TV star. And Johnny Depp really enthusiastically embraced this role because he knew a little bit about John Waters as far as his reputation, previous films, and Johnny Depp was not content to be the teenage heartthrob that his role on 21 Jump Street and the marketing thereof had kind of pigeonholed him to be. And so this was an opportunity for him to cash in on his youthfulness, his good looks, of course, and his eye candy appeal to his audience. I mean, that's a pretty compelling look you're going to get there on the cover, right? You're going to see a lot more of Johnny Depp in this film. He plays kind of a bad boy, a rock and roller, or a drape, as the slang of the time goes. A greaser, a kid with a leather jacket, big pompadour hairdo, born on the wrong side of the tracks. And as you might imagine, that lovely young lady on the cover, her name as an actress is Amy Locane. She's a good girl who comes from a respectable family. Even though she's an orphan, she's being raised by her grandmother, played by Polly Bergen. She's been very good, straight-laced all her life, but she suddenly finds an interest in this rebel bad boy, and that's kind of what drives the whole plot. So it's basically a bit of a class-based comedy with a lot of like 50s rockabilly, rock and roll, not just the music. It is a musical. There's a lot of really excellent production pieces towards the end of the film in particular. But it also plays out all the stereotypes, the tropes, the cliches of juvenile delinquent movies from the 1950s when the post-war baby boomers were starting to come of age, and a certain percentage of them were kind of getting in trouble or not exactly playing by the rules. So Cry Baby comes out of John Waters' formative personal experiences. I won't go into a lot of depth about his whole oeuvre, but he's based in Baltimore. He says right in the opening of the commentary track that he provides that this song, Cry Baby, was the very first record he ever owned when he was 9 or 10 years old. A version of that song is played in the film under the opening credits. And so it's a really fascinating film in terms of its presentation, because you get to see John Waters' aesthetic blown up to pretty large proportions, of, like I say, with big choreographed dance and musical sequences, a lot of different set designs and environments where the action takes place. You can tell there's a very professional crew behind all of this. The music management and the rights is pretty impressive. They really have a lot of great deep cuts. Of course, John Waters always has the most impeccable taste as far as musical accompaniment to his films, and this one is no exception. Some original tunes as well as some covers, and also some some kind of throwbacks from back in the day. So a really excellent soundtrack if you like that type of music. But let's just take a look at the cast, the supporting cast here. I've already mentioned Polly Bergen. This young woman, Amy Locane, she was a 17-year-old, basically just cast on her looks, which are pure and angelic. She was just a high school kid from a Catholic girls' school that, she did an audition and they gave her the part. She had done apparently like some TV commercials and, dance and things like that. So she wasn't like a complete unprepared, untrained performer, but this certainly was a kind of a breakout role for her. And that innocence and that youthfulness is really used to great effect here, because as you would imagine with a John Waters film, there's a lot of other more experienced personnel surrounding her. And so she definitely had a pretty interesting awakening and introduction to the John Waters kind of community that he builds around him and the films that he made. So some of the other performers that you see here, Ricki Lake, before she was in her big talk show, that was probably maybe her most famous performance or her most famous role now. That she was also in Hairspray, so this is kind of a follow-up for her. Susan Tyrrell, maybe not as familiar of a name, but she's a very outrageous presence in the film, and a really kind of a notorious wild woman performer. Iggy Pop, the great Iggy Pop from Iggy and the Stooges, and his solo career, still alive and kicking and making new music these days, but he plays kind of this kind of rustic hillbilly bumpkin type of guy. And Tracy Lords is in it, kind of a young woman who was just kind of coming out of a pretty significant scandal. I'll leave the details for your own research. Let's see, who are some other names here? Mink Stoll, for the old school John Waters crowd. She kind of makes an appearance. Troy Donahue, Joe D'Alessandro, David Nelson, the older brother from Ozzie and Harriet. And Patricia Hearst is how she's credited. I think of her as Patty Hearst, the daughter of a very wealthy California family who was kidnapped in the early 70s, taken hostage by the Symbionese Liberation Army. Of course, this was many years after all of that disruption of the normal course of her life, but she plays a pretty memorable role here as well. So a fantastic cast. Well, let me just drop the trailer very abruptly into this clip so you can see what Crybaby has going on visually. You start to see some of those cast members that I just mentioned showing up in the frame here. These are the squares, of course, going about their perfectly tranquil life in 1950s suburbia until the bad boy comes along. Johnny Depp on his motorcycle, singing that swagger and rockabilly, and taking his girl's heart by storm. And of course, she has the same effect on him as they both look across the tracks and want what the other one's got. And they want to get them into their lives. But of course, the squares don't accept the drapes into their company, and the drapes have their own reservations about this pretty young square girl who's trying to mingle in their crowd. But it's really just another example of John Waters, playfully challenging his audiences to be more open and accepting and understanding of our shared and common humanity. I mean, I guess there are some villains in here, but it's all very lighthearted and really with the effect of, I think, helping us just to appreciate each other, especially the eccentrics and weirdos among us. But also doing it very, very creatively, with a lot of nods to, movies of the 1950s. You see the choreographed set pieces, the dances, And just all the conventions that make this a very entertaining film, and a great example of John Waters at his audience-pleasing best. And with this disc, with this release, you get again the theatrical cut in 4K, the director's cut with 7 minutes restored, basically things that the studio wasn't really comfortable going with, as they wanted a PG-13 crowd pleaser. This is a film that was designed to make a lot of money and capitalize, cash in on Johnny Depp's fame and reputation. It did not do that. I think there's just a little bit too much of that weirdness to make this a mainstream commercial hit, at least at the time of 1990 when it first came out. I mean, they could have played it a little bit safer and maybe not put off audiences quite so much, but I think there's also a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor that people weren't quite prepared or expecting, and for the core John Waters audience that had kind of come up with him through the 70s and even into the 80s, this probably felt pretty tame and watered down. It is a PG-13, but there's a few bizarro scenes and moments in there that I think would get a lot of middle-class kind of pop culture audiences squirming uncomfortably. There's a French kissing scene. There's a scene where a young woman gives birth in the backseat of a car. There's the lead female character is drinking a jar of tears. Just some oddness that maybe doesn't sit quite well with your right down the middle class mainstream suburban movie-going audience at the time. But you get a lot of interviews on that second disc. So there's the director's cut, and then the second disc, the Blu-ray, has interviews with a lot of the lead actors, or the lead supporting actors, I should say, that I've already named. Some making of documentary from 2005, as well as kind of a more recent kind of look back at the film with conversations involving John Waters, producer Pat Moran, his cinematographer, and Mink Stoll. She kind of gives a little bit of a perspective from somebody who's been along for almost the whole ride with John Waters. So, yeah, pretty amazing disc. I think the only thing that could have improved it would be a little reading material. It would be nice if there could have been a little bit of a printed supplement in here. You do get the nice slipcase cover. As you can see, the Blu-ray is in the tray over on my player there. But this is a really fantastic addition if you're a John Waters fan, or maybe if you haven't really thought seriously about this movie, you will find a lot to like about Cry Baby. It definitely deserves its place at the very, top tier of John Waters films for reasons I hopefully I've covered and explained adequately enough. But this is a lot of fun, very impressive piece of work, and a wonderful release that Kino Studio Classics has put together to give this film a very well-deserved showcase.